Sweet. Okay, so yeah, thanks Dwayne. Yeah, I'm from Open Learning, the CTO. I also spent quite a bit of time before getting into Open Learning as a teacher as well, teaching computer science, and then that sort of like evolved into actually doing a lot of research into education as well. So I kind of see myself as a bit like of a cross-disciplinary kind of person as well. The computer science stuff is where I do a lot of stuff, and the education side is where I think about a lot of stuff, and I try and sort of marry them together a bit. And I found that that's quite rare in a lot of the education technology industry, because what you end up finding is that there's a lot of technology people who focus on what they think the education market wants in terms of technology, and they're thinking about it just from a technology perspective. And you have a lot of people from an education background who don't have the connections or resources to be able to build the tools that they desire. So being in a position where you can sort of marry both is, you know, it's quite a cool place to be. So what do we do? Open Learning is it's a SaaS product. It's a software as a service. So it's like an online service like your Gmail or your Google Docs or your Office 365 kind of cloud platform. So it's essentially a website, mobile app, that kind of thing. And we're a lifelong learning platform as this cloud service. So that is somewhere in between running MOOCs, if you're familiar with the whole MOOC space, and award courses, professional development, and everything in between. Both accredited, non-accredited, or award programs, or the whole thing. Anything that you can deliver online as a software as a service. So what we provide are sort of like these authoring tools for educators to come online, and these sort of allow you to put together experiences. So it's an experience design toolkit for learners, and then once you've built this course out of the toolkit, you can run deliveries of these courses, and then in those deliveries you can facilitate the interactions between students, and the learners can interact with each other and form communities. So it's this heavy community focus. We also provide educational portals around that, so the cataloguing of courses, managing branding, promotion, and all that sort of thing, managing enrollments into your various deliveries and how you want to represent that to the world. And what we also do is a lot of onboarding, customer education, and project support with our learning experience designers. So we have a team of learning experience designers as part of our company who actually support learning experience design as a practice in lots of different institutions, and helping them to actually see how to build courses on Open Learning in the way that we think is the most effective. So how we actually do that, we have this community-first design approach. So our learning outcomes are sort of treated as values which we instill within the community of practice. So there's not so much looking at individual attributes that we're trying to measure in individual students, but measuring how well the community as a whole performs. So we're looking at things like a successful course being where learners are teaching each other. They're actually exchanging knowledge, rather than it just being like acquiring knowledge from some source. We also have this focus on self-expression and sharing. So the whole platform, all the tools are built around sort of posts and conversations and sharing things and creating things together, rather than submissions and sort of Q&A based approaches to things, which is a little bit more conventional. And this all drives, when you're creating things rather than answering things, it sort of drives this whole focus towards creating artifacts of your knowledge and your understanding, and lots of this sort of rich, divergent data is coming out. So if everyone's answering something the same way, or trying to get the correct answer, there's not much to talk about. Whereas if people are sort of, they're expressing themselves and sharing parts of their experiences, then you start to create quite rich conversation, and that also in turn allows you to have these artifacts that you can use to demonstrate your understanding, the projects you've created, whatever it is that you've produced, which automatically all gets populated into this portfolio of learning artifacts. So you have something you can take away from a course which is yours, which is personal, and differentiates you and your understanding and your knowledge. And that's quite an important part of what we provide. So that's kind of the introduction. When we're doing this, we have a whole bunch of different roles. These are the three main ones. You have your subject matter experts. So when you're in a university setting, most likely this comes from the lecturer or the person who's putting the content together. And in a lot of universities, the lecturers are academics who have been sort of thrust into teaching positions. So what we do is we assist them with this learning experience design partnership. And the learning experience designer maps out the learner's journey, works with the subject matter expert to design the right experience, the right flow, the right voice, and all the activities for the course that are all going to fit together and make the most sense educationally, rather than just sort of how do we teach them what they want to know, and also how do we actually take them on a journey and have the best experience in learning it. So that's kind of the one that I'm going to focus on today. And also we have this facilitation that happens within the community, within the online platform. It sort of cultivates the interaction between learners when you're actually delivering the course. Prompts people to have the right types of interactions and to address any concerns and sort of get people to coordinate themselves such that they're owning the community and the community itself is flourishing. So these are sort of like the different kinds of hats that one person might wear if they're designing the course themselves, but most often we actually split these up into three different types of roles. So we'll have the subject matter expert working with the learning experience designer, and a lot of the time our community facilitators are actually people who have done the course quite recently and come back for like a mentoring role, because they're the ones who actually know what the journey's like and have that sort of more intimate experience with it. So that sort of like gives you the overview of what the different roles are. But the learning experience part, I call it learning experience because we've seen this sort of X come into a few different roles in other industries and other parts of industries. So you see this like UI versus UX that's come up, yeah? So user interface design versus user experience design. UI design traditionally was like, about the buttons and the, whether you're scrolling or whether you're doing this or where you're going to put this and how it's going to look, and you're designing a user interface for the user. And a successful user interface is one that can be used, whereas the UX designer is looking at the whole experience, the whole journey, mapping out this journey and seeing how straightforward is this user interface. If you're designing a shop, can you actually get through the whole process and enjoy the experience, and it's a good experience and everyone's happy about it as they're doing it, rather than, is the button in the right place and that sort of thing. So it's a more of a zoomed out sort of perspective, looking at it from that human first perspective, and it's about the story. So I often think of this as sort of like a more anthropological approach to things, rather than just sort of like doing like an A/B test and getting some data back and saying, oh, this one's better than that one. You can take your analysis and step back and say, what does the story look like? When someone's doing this, what are they feeling? Where are they getting stuck? What other influences in their lives are causing them to, change their attitude about how they're using this product? So it's more empathetic and it maps out the whole journey. Similarly, you have this sort of customer support or customer service moving into the whole customer experience space. And it's a similar kind of thing. You're seeing these customers that as needing assistance, needing advice, troubleshooting their problems, reacting to what they need in one space. But then you're taking a step back and you're saying, let's understand the whole customer experience journey. Let's map it out. And let's see how the whole experience that the customer has with your brand makes them feel. And how does it actually affect their perception of your brand? And you're analysing and managing that perception so that they can get a much more, they can feel better and and resonate with what's going on as a story rather than just as a whole bunch of different data points that you're sort of looking at from like a reactive troubleshooting perspective. So that sort of like gives you this attitude shift. And LX, if you want to move it into that space as well, is also just looking at that whole learner experience. Yeah, from a sort of a human-centered perspective, the learner, from when they're first getting interested about a particular learning experience, right through to what they're going to do with it at the end. And for us as a lifelong learning platform, there is no end. It's really just what are they going to do next, and then where's that going to lead them, and then when they go into their job, what are they going to need then, and all of that kind of thing. So it's the whole journey, but when you're actually designing a course, you're focusing in on just a small part of that. And you're saying, well, what does the story of the learner look like in this scenario, like for this course? What is the ideal journey? Who are they going to meet? How are they going to feel about it? What are they going to say about it to other people? Where are they going to be supported? Where are they going to feel stressed out? You know, are they going to feel resentful about particular elements of that? Are they going to feel excited about bits? Where's there going to be some tension? Is there going to be some narrative stuff that we can put in there to make them feel good about the whole journey that they're going on? And what are they going to get out of it? So it's much more about their feelings. It's much more about how they're motivated. It's much more about how they're empowered. And that whole, human story piece. So when we're sort of trying to analyze this, we actually have some courses that we've set up where part of the course experience is actually to journal your experience through the course as part of the course. And that's actually given us some of the richest data we can see, because we're actually able to then go through and actually read the stories and actually put together the narrative from lots of student perspectives and actually see where they're stressed out and see where they're stumbling across things, and getting this whole sort of journey, it sort of crystallizes much more readily. And also, just by virtue of having a social platform where there's lots of conversations happening and everyone's reflecting and sort of contributing knowledge to a bigger conversation in all elements of the course, you get to see a lot of different facets of the learner's journey as they go through, because they're not just trying to answer questions, they're not just trying to respond to things, they're not just going to the forums to answer, to find an answer to something or to clarify something. They're actually talking about their experiences as well, and that's what we want in these environments, is that we want to design environments that allow people to have these rich, open conversations. Going back to a course that I actually put together with Dwayne and a lecturer, was it 2 years ago now? Yeah. Some of the conversations that came up in that course was just making jokes about how the lecturer always seemed to wear a purple shirt.
Still does.
Still does, yeah. And you know, these are the sorts of things that if you can start to get the community to make jokes about things and band together around things, these are some of the things that stand out as little flags that say, actually, you're starting to have a healthy community here, because people aren't just focused on getting results, they're not just focused on getting grades, they're actually starting to relate to one another. And when you're starting to relate to one another, you're building community, and when you're building community, you're opening up all these opportunities for new types of learning connections to form. But this all sort of comes back to the learner's knowledge that you're trying to open up in your experiences. And I've sort of mapped out a bunch of the words that we see come up in industry as to how this all kind of might fit together for the learner, the teacher, and the types of activities and all this sort of stuff. And I've actually mapped it up to something I stole from Lena, which is these orders of learning from looking at it from that epistemic perspective. So if you're looking at these ways of knowing, and then you sort of the words that we use for lots of different things, you can start to see that like a lot of what we're actually given, like people come to us with like a stack of PDFs or some slides and saying, I want a course, how do I do it? How do I put this together? And they're always coming from this top perspective. And they're saying like, I'm a lecturer, I'm a subject matter expert, And the traditional way that they've taught is through just explanation, presentation, telling things. Yeah, it's probably very familiar that the status quo of teaching, especially in tertiary, is still quite focused at this top layer. And you have the sort of the words that you use often, like if it's in a more, I guess, corporate setting, then you might say that they're an audience or a consumer or something like that, but otherwise in a more school perspective, a student or a pupil or something like that. And you're producing content is the main activity that is seen to be what you need to do in this realm. And these are the sorts of activities that end up being produced. It's the videos, the quizzes, the infographics, written materials, readings, Q&A, forums, sort of tacked on the side in Moodle or something like that. And you've got this transactional type of thing where it's like, I just want to acquire the knowledge. How do I acquire the knowledge? And close my gap of understanding as quickly as possible. But what we try and do as the learning experience designers, when we're, as LX designers in working with people on projects, but as well as designing the tools for a technology platform like Open Learning, because those two go together, is we're more focusing down here and a little bit here. Because this one's been done to death in education technology, right? There's a million ways of running quizzes. There's a million ways of disseminating videos. But this is where the interesting and innovative stuff can happen, yeah, with education technology. And that's why we put a lot of focus in that area. So I already talked about the importance of community in all of our learning experiences and within the platform. But yeah, it actually activates a different kind of knowledge. So we're actually getting people who are not just able to answer an exam about it, but are actually able to demonstrate something deeper. They're actually able to talk to people about it at a conference. They're actually about to hold reflective conversations about it. They can actually improvise with it and think about how it might relate to other things, and have a lot of experience doing that with each other within a community where people are coming from lots of different experiences and sharing that all together. So this is what we really try and demonstrate in terms of the artifacts that come out of open learning and what you can actually package up and say, here is a portfolio that I have to showcase of the types of knowledge that I'm capable of. And yeah, I'll go into that a little bit more a bit later. So that's kind of the knowledge piece, but there's a lot of other pieces as well involved in being a learning experience designer. There's a whole system here that sort of goes together with the tools that we use and the technologies. If we don't have the right tools, if we're stuck with just quizzing tools, we can't do a lot of those other high order kinds of activities. If we have all the tools available to us, we don't really know how to put them together in a way that actually makes a sensible and enjoyable experience. And once we've put them together in an enjoyable experience, and we've figured out that actually this works really well in this scenario for this particular purpose, how do we share that? How do we bundle that up and then reuse it in lots of different ways for lots of different courses? And then explore how that might also be repurposed and variations of it formed and that sort of thing. So this is where we start to develop some recipes or these learning experience design patterns. But also we need to start somewhere when we have the learner journey, and we have to sort of analyze who is the target learner. We have to think about designing a voice for the course. We had this course which was, we use the word course very liberally. Sometimes a course for us is really just some sort of learning community. But it was a whole bunch of athletes, elite athletes, who were trying to learn a code of conduct for how that they were meant to, they performed on an international stage, and they were having some problems with social media and things like this because they're young athletes, they get isolated in their sort of training environments and whatnot. And taking this sort of tick and flick code of conduct sort of approach that they had come from and trying to turn it into a community of practice, you have to think about, okay, what sort of voice are these kind of people going to respond to? If it's really formal and sort of legalese code of practice language, they're not going to respond to it. If it's something more casual and something they can relate to, and then you're going to have more success. But if you go too cheesy, then they're not going to respect it either. So you kind of have to get that bit right. And then the general approach as well. You know, you want people to maybe be sharing things together in memes and things, and you also want to sort of like engage the subject matter expert. Like, what's the carrot there for the subject matter expert? And if they're an academic, it might be that you want to co-create a paper with them, or it might be that you want to produce something of value to the actual organisation under the hood. And we use, I mentioned those patterns before. So I come from a computer science and software engineering world, and we use design patterns throughout everything that we do. And if you Google design patterns, you'll find a plethora of software engineering resources. UX designers use them as well, but learning experience design is now benefiting from this as well. And this is some of the different ways that we kind of put some of this together. So breaking the ice is a really important thing for us when we're starting a community. We want people to be able to check in and express themselves early in the environment and talk to each other and get started and get that ball rolling, get that community fired up. And we have like a whole bunch of ways of doing that we can reuse on lots of different courses and customize to the course itself. And we can sort of, as you can see, there's lots and lots of different examples of where you might want to fit those patterns into different parts of activities. So what do you think might be some of the challenges of doing this?
Tailoring the product to the client's needs when the client doesn't usually know what they want.
That's a big one. The client not knowing what they want, or the client just essentially going like, this sounds like a lot of work. Why can't I just put my video and quizzes up on the platform? You know, that's what it always comes back to. It's this sort of thing which is like, where's the value? It's I just throw all my stuff out there. They can learn from it. They can do their exam, and I've done my job, and I can walk away. So we really have to create that value for them, and this is what a typical university course kind of looks like when we sort of get it in our hands. It's just focused all around like assessment breakdowns and things like this. It probably fits like half of what you might find in course outlines and handbooks for things. But what we have to do is we have to take that, we take it and we turn it into something that looks more like, on the left-hand side, a student experience or a learner experience that we've designed, and we look at the evidence or the artifacts of knowledge that are produced from that and what value they will have to the learner, what value they'll have to the organisation, to the brand, whatever it might be that's trying to be produced here. And it really comes back to focusing what the learner can show and what they can demonstrate. So we're changing the attitude here from what's on the exam to what's in my portfolio of knowledge, what can I demonstrate. And this sort of like allows you to align lots of things back up together so you can see the types of knowledge that students have demonstrated and the outcomes that they align to, the activities that have generated them, the courses that have generated those, and whether they all align back up to program level outcomes, industry skills, knowledge. When you have this all in one platform, you have a really interesting data puzzle that you can put together. If you're designing these non-constructive courses, like just throwing videos and quizzes out there, then you're not generating these interesting pieces of data, you're not generating these interesting artifacts. And I would argue that demonstrable evidence is actually becoming more valuable to the employer now than accreditation. And you've had people like Google just flat out saying, yeah, we don't care about degrees. Just show us what you can do. Just show us your portfolio of work. Show us your GitHub profile. And open source projects that you contributed to. That's more meaningful. But you also, in the current day and age, we have to sort of tie them back together as well. So accreditations with evidence hanging off them and things like this. So I'm going to leave you with this question, which is, we're producing all this experience data. We're producing, if we're designing really rich learner experiences, and these experiences are designed so that the learner is being really constructive, creating stuff with others. You're starting to see who they're interacting with. You're encouraging them to interact with people. You're starting to see the ways that they talk. You're starting to see what they can produce. You're starting to have a look at the types of language they use, the types of artifacts they produce. You're starting to look at if it's a course on software engineering, it might be what sort of code they produce. If it's a course on writing, it might be what sort of writing they produce. If it's whatever it is, and how others respond to that, and all those interactions that you get. What can be done with all that data? Yeah, and that's kind of like where I'm going to leave it as a question for that experience data, especially in this age of machine learning and AI, and what that can tell you about someone, build a profile such that you can perhaps search and see across this sea of people from all their experiences what someone might be able to do and what value that provides to people. All right, thanks.
Thank you, David.
Awesome. So I'm Wes Hunterreich. I'm one of the founders and co-CEOs of Practera. And our world is around experiential learning, which is sort of the opposite of, but the same thing as learning experience, in that what David just talked about learning experience is really about having the student experience driving the learning, whereas in experiential learning, the experience is the learning. And we'll talk a little bit about what the difference is, but it's really about real-world application. The talk that I'm going to get into is about really learning outcomes and what technology can do to drive those outcomes, and where there are some things that are working and where things that are not working. But we'll get through that through talking a little bit about experiential learning. And everything that David was talking about, and the way we go about instructional design and the way we think about learning experience, is exactly what he's talking about. And where we're going towards as an endpoint is very, very similar, which is that students, through these experiences, are able to go into the real world, into the workplace, and talk about their experiences by showing what they've been able to do. Our specific world is focused around a particular pedagogy of experiential learning, which I'll get into in a little bit. So you can think of what we do as a variant or subset of what open learning does, and they're very compatible and work in the same ecosystem, and there's a lot of convergences. Where I'm going to start is on a way we think about everything we do, which is the role that technology can play in education. And we do not see technology as a substitute for educators or really anyone in a instructional role. Rather, we see it as a force multiplier. And if you look at any type of educational program, if you have very little tech, we didn't have the camera or the slideshow. I'm sitting here in front of a couple of students. We can have a great discussion. We can learn a lot. I can sit there and work one-on-one with somebody or in a pair. It's very expensive. It's my time and energy is only going to one or two people, and so I could deliver, if I'm capable of it, a high-quality experience for a small number of students, so low scale, and something that's not very cost-effective. So the dream here is that we have technology that basically lets us push out the pyramid, and whether it's open learning or it's Practera or it's an LMS or whatever it is, the idea is how do you be a force multiplier? How do we take this, and through the camera and through the people online, suddenly a whole bunch of other people can dial in, they can participate in the conversation, we can start to scale up. That's one thing to do when you're talking about sort of traditional learning, lecture in the front of the room, bunch of content that we want you guys to absorb and reflect that. It's a totally different thing in an applied learning environment where it's about, all right, great, I talked to you, now go out and do something with it. Now, how am I going to support you through that? How am I going to drive your ability to learn from failure, learn from feedback? That's the world of experiential learning, and there's a whole different set of considerations from traditional learning when you think about that triangle, which I'll talk about. So our business, our whole world is around powering, designing, and delivering experiential learning with a technology underpinning. And so everything we do has come from a perspective of scalability, cost, quality at scale. And we came at this because we came from the corporate industry side, where when you think about problems, you think about it first on, okay, well, how much is this going to cost? How much impact is it going to have? This is actually, you look at everything from a business case point of view, which is very different than when you come at things from an academic side, where you look at things from a pedagogical quality. You want to make sure you've got it right. You don't care really if you do ultimately, but initially, if it's one person or 100 people, you want what you're doing to be right on a core. Whereas in a business thing, you say, I got it to 80%, but I can get it out there a week early, so yeah, win. And so we came at it very much from that angle and learned to bring in the academic rigor later on. Just to give you a flavor of what we do as a business, we work with a lot of companies, about 2/3 of the universities in Australia. What we've been focusing on is student engagement. So at scale, how do you keep students engaged in applied learning programs, particularly those that are extracurricular or voluntary? There's one thing if you've got to be there to get a grade. It's another thing if you can come in and out, it doesn't matter. Why that's important is all of these programs that we work on involve employers. And if you're an employer and you're putting your time into helping students and they don't show up, you disengage, and that's pretty expensive on all levels. Outcomes, really important. We do a lot of work with international students, so when we started from a Deloitte context, it was very much all we care about is the top of the bell curve. If you're in the top 5%, 10%, terrific, we'll work with you, it's easy. Once we started looking at international students and broader student populations, it was how do you give these experiences to the middle of the bell curve? So students who are not automatically going to just impress you right off the gate because they've actually done it 10 times already, or their parents run a company somewhere, or whatever the situation is. But these are students who might even be, they could be struggling with language issues, they could be struggling with preparation levels, cultural context, any number of things, or they could just simply be not the best and brightest in the class, and you need to find a way to give them those experiences. How are you going to get the outcomes across the bell curve? And then how are you going to get scale so that you don't have to put 20 people together to actually drive a cohort of 200? How can you get 2 or 3 people to drive 5,000 students? And then the last bit is around quality assurance, which is the minute you start doing things at scale, you get the academic side comes in, rightly so, saying, how are you making sure people aren't getting thrown under the bus? Think of it this way. If I've got 20 people in a classroom and I have 10% of my students are having difficulties and are really struggling, I've got 2 people complaining to me. If I've got 2,000 people in this classroom and I've got 10%, I've got 200 students coming in complaining to me, I'm suddenly thinking this class is in real trouble. But it's actually not, because I've got 1,800 students that are having a great time and working really well. But as an educator and as an education institution that responds quite strongly to any issues around quality and issues, that suddenly raises red flags all up. So when you're thinking about scale, you need to make sure you have a quality assurance framework in place so that you can actually figure out if these are real issues or if these are things that just are natural with scale. And the other thing is we do, and this is kind of why we're here, we do a lot of research as part of this. So we have, we don't have any sort of free users. Everything's paid as part of a university curriculum. So we've had somewhere around 50,000 students in the last few years on the platform doing various forms of courses. We collect a lot of data on that, which we do for internal research, and with our university partners, we put out white papers. Obviously, these are corporate style research, so they're very much, our papers are focused on marketing, but our university partners also do research which is more academically grounded off of the data. And so that's some of what I'm going to talk about. Just to get a little bit more into the depth of experiential learning, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. There are lots of different flavors of experiential learning, so the traditional internships that are actually supported versus go out and just get a job somewhere, but where there's actually some scaffolding and support. That's a common one, cooperative education, where you go and do a semester of courses, then a semester of work, then a semester of courses, and interleaved in different ways. Work integrated learning, project-based learning, service learning. All of these are different flavors of experiential learning, and all of these there is more than just the learner and the content and the educator. There's an experience provider. There's a context in which the learning is happening. And the relationship between the people providing the experience and the context and the learner is essential. And so if you can optimize that relationship, and in particular, it has to do with feedback. This was modeled in the 70s by David Kolb, the experiential learning cycle, which is a concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. And this is basically his way of articulating how we learn experientially. And for us, the idea is if you're in a learning experience, the more times you get to go through the cycle, the deeper you're learning on a particular topic. So this is really about you do something happens, you have a chance to see what happened and try to reflect internally on what did you just see, what did you feel, if you were an actor in it, what happened to you. Then you have to sit there and say, well, what does this mean? How does this actually go with the theory that I understand? Are the theories right, wrong? Are they making sense? And then you come back and say, right, so if my expectations weren't met, then what am I going to do differently? How am I going to change my expectations and do something? Or if they were, how am I going to do it again to verify or move on to the next task? On a technology way, what we look at that is, okay, this real world activity happened, you have to capture that somewhere. You have to have some way of capturing evidence of that activity. Then you need to have some way of getting feedback on that from someone that's important, whether it's an expert, a mentor, a reviewer, a peer, and then you take that, and that's the point when you start to look at the learning content. So in our world of experiential learning, it's very task first. So in a traditional learning environment, you do your theory, you do your theoretical learning on the topic, you take your assessments and quizzes, and then you go out and apply it. When we construct learning experiences, we start to say, well, what's the actual project? Now get out there and start doing it. I know you don't know how to do it. Here's a how-to guide, but just use it as a companion, go do your best at it. Now let's give you feedback on that. Let's get somebody, either a peer or a professional, to come in and talk to you about what you did, what worked, what didn't. Because at that point in time, all of a sudden, the theory starts to make a lot more sense, where you say, okay, this didn't work, why didn't it work? What can I do differently? And so we think about how we use technology to drive that. And the most important aspect of this from a technology point of view is the feedback. If you can make that feedback happen more often at a deeper and a more sophisticated level with the smallest amount of effort from all providers, then you can drive that cycle more frequently. And if I've got a project that goes for 3 weeks and I can drive that cycle 5 times, I'm going to get a lot deeper learning than if I can only drive it once. But I need that feedback to happen 5 times. So that's where we start to think, how do we make that work? So if we think about the outcomes from experiential learning, which is really about skill development, self-awareness, recognition of, first of all, a recognition of what your skills and capabilities are and aren't, and then the ability to move the needle on that. There are certain things where you have design and learner experience, and that the design process can have a high impact, and then there are certain things where technology can have a high impact. So from a design point of view, it's really important in any type of project or experiential learning that everybody knows what it is they're expected to do, that you can manage expectations. If you have an employer in a learning mix, they have to know. So a classic thing that happens with projects is students put their first piece of work in for feedback, and the employers look at this and say, this is horrible. Like, I don't even know why I'm working with these students. And if they're new to this, that is a natural reaction, and you have to make sure that they are expecting that to happen so they don't disengage. Now the truth is, what employers often forget, because it's been a while since they've worked with students, is how quickly students adapt and learn and are flexible. They're used to working with their own internal staff, where if they produce something terrible, the next thing they produce is going to be just as terrible. But with students produce something that's not right, and then they give feedback, and then the next day they come back with something 10 times better. It always happens. And it's always like this big, oh my God, I can't believe that they listened to me moment for employers, which is actually insanely rewarding and hooks them into the learning process. So yeah, one outcome is, how do you keep your employers or your experts deeply engaged? And part of it is setting up those expectations so that they're not surprised when they get that first bad piece of work, but then they're blown away when the next piece of feedback comes in. So expectation management, huge. Shared valuable objectives, expectation, common framework for student, mentor, and educator collaboration. This is sort of stuff that David's team does incredibly well in terms of social and peer and collaborative learning, and making sure that they understand how they should work together and what should happen here. A lot of this is about the design. How are you going to collaborate? Just saying collaborate. I mean, how many of you have done some sort of teamwork course where it's like you're supposed to work in a team, but the teacher never tells you what working in a team is actually supposed to be? What do? Does each person just do a different part of the project and then you put the report together, one page, and submit it? Or do you actually have to work together on each task, and how should you do that? So actually structuring that and designing that's essential. And then reflection. Reflection is one of the most essential parts of experiential learning. You have to think about what you've done actively, both when you're doing it and after the fact, and how far after the fact. We get students coming to us 2 years after they finished a program saying, oh my God, I finally now understand what it is that I was supposed to learn there, because I finally saw this happen in my job, and now I understand why I was getting all that crazy feedback back then, which I thought was totally wrong, and that employer was out of their mind. Now I'm that employer, and oh yeah, I get it. So that reflective process, sometimes it can happen immediately, sometimes it takes a while. All of this can be done with design and really good learning experience design. Technology can unlock on another thing, support. How do you drive that feedback cycle? How do you figure out which learners need support? If I've got 3,000 learners doing 500 projects with 400 employers, and I got 2 people to manage that, how am I going to figure out which of those projects is off track right this second? Because I can't possibly manage every single one of those projects and look into it. But if I've got technology, if I've structured it so that I've got enough data being captured at every point in time in that project, that I can see what's happening, and I can I can manage by exception, suddenly I can start getting to scale. And I can get to scale where every student feels supported, because the moment they have an issue, I can get on top of that. And the biggest thing about experiential learning is most of the time students and even the mentors don't know they have an issue. They think everything's going fine. We see this all the time where you've got a team of students and 2 of them think one thing, 2 of them think another thing, and the employer thinks a third thing, and they don't know because they haven't talked to each other about this. They don't even know they should talk to each other about it. We see it, and we can drive an intervention right then and there, which creates a much better outcome. So that's a huge thing, is support. Actually driving engagement, figuring out how the team should talk to each other or the individual should talk to the employer, how you make that meaningful, that's something that technology can drive by nudging, responding, giving them suggestions on what they should talk about. And getting back to the other side of support, which is you need to be able to support them effectively, but then you have to know what issues are happening, and you can do that. That's one of the areas where AI can come in. If you've got the right data stream, you can start to look for patterns, and you can also look for patterns on a quality assurance to make sure that the instructional design is delivering the outcomes that you're looking for. I'm just going to go talk a little bit about a couple of cases with some actual data. I'm happy to dive into this a little bit more. The first case study is here. It's in the uni. We've been working for years with the business school on their Job Smart program, which just got an AFR Higher Ed Award this year. And that has been a process of building a scaffolded experiential program from day one the students arrive to when they graduate, by slowly introducing employability and different skills around employability to them each semester with a range of different things. The first is more of a series of activities that they attend where they learn about why they should care, get their CV in shape, get their LinkedIn profile up, the basic things to get them to understand that this is something they should care about. In semester 2, they get into some simulations and case studies and activities, very light touch with employers, but they're getting employer feedback. By semester 3, they're actually doing short projects with employers. By semester 4, they're doing longer projects. They're getting into more internship type experiences and getting into simulations of job applications and interviews. And so by the time they're graduated, they've been stepped through this experience. So there's an overarching instructional design and learner experience, and then there's experiential programs throughout. And this is, this has outstanding. And this is predominantly targeting international students in the business school, although it's open to everyone. But it's really picked up by the international students who see this as, really effective for themselves, because it gives them a guidance along the way of questions that they don't feel like they're comfortable asking, and it sort of answers it as they go. So good recommendation. This is on a resilience case study on, literally nearly all of them said that the case study, which was interactive, helped them get their resilience up, so that was a big outcome from that. And then, got just in a semester, 376 corporate projects. So this is a sort of scale, and this is really being managed by a team of 2 people internally in Sydney Uni. So these sort of scales are a total step change in terms of cost and quality. There's about 1,500 students enrolled in the JobSmart program at any given time. We also run a project network across all of Australia and every state. There's several thousand students in that, with hundreds of industry partners. And that's run by 2 people in our organization that look over all of that. Again, this is we see a 90% completion rate for an extracurricular, fully virtual project, which is kind of unheard of. And again, this is about support. It's about the scaffolding. It's about the fact that they're getting the feedback they want when they want it. But what's interesting here is, again, I'm talking about different outcomes here. Completion rate, that's an outcome. Not how much did you learn, did you get this score on this exam, but did you actually get through the whole experience? And this gets driven, again, by the sort of business of university, which is this a revenue generator or is this a cost? So they've already gotten the revenue in from the student's tuition. So now anything that they have to do to deliver a better experience to a student is a cost. So now everything's a cost-benefit analysis. And so they start caring more about seeing how far their dollar went than necessarily knowing just exactly how much each student learned. And again, next one, student would recommend the experience. The student experience, massive thing. Every university is currently trying to figure out how to boost student experience because it's directly tied to revenue and then scalability. So our job is to make sure that these things actually deliver learning outcomes, and that the students are not just going through having a fun experience that they all feel great to complete. Our job is to make sure that it's actually got the depth. So that's why we start diving into these things and do these research projects. So the project that's in the white paper that we sent out is really around looking at several of the different types of programs that we've run over the years, where we've actually used a similar pedagogical design principle, but the variants are the length of the project and the amount of in-person versus online. And we did this because we anecdotally and internally felt that our online, we were actually surprised at this, but our fully online projects were getting the same sort of metrics that our very high touch projects were getting. And we said, that can't be right. Why would students be just as okay with an online only project as one where they're spending more time face to face with employers at desks? Something had to be wrong. And so we dove into it and we found out it really wasn't the case, that as long as the instructional design was good, and the student experience and the learner experience was good, the students were satisfied, and there wasn't really a correlation there. And that was pretty powerful, because it started to say that, wait a minute, this means that we can actually start to offer well-designed experiences in a fully online format and start to hit really large scale numbers. It's not a replacement for everything else, but when you start thinking about scaffolding out programs so that everyone can at least get some basic experiences in there, and then they can branch off into their own specialties, it becomes a foundation of something a lot bigger. Again, this was based off what we had and the types of programs we had direct control over. We run a lot more stuff on our system, and we can do research across that, but these ones, because we control, we had the rights to do the research on and publish. And so there's some questions around why weren't there some other types of programs and formats in there. These ones were the easiest for us to compare, but we're continuing to look into this. Just one other thing, and then I'll sort of jump through to question time. But at Boston University, this is another type of thing where the professor, the big transformation that technology let him do is shift from having to stand in the front of the classroom and teach the theory to saying, okay, now this is all online, and in fact the project's all online, so I don't even have to worry about showing you guys how to do the project. Now I can sit back and look at how your teams are working on the project. So he uses some of our Team 360 and collaboration evaluation tools to figure out how they're actually working together. And so his whole class time is now focused around diving into their sort of contrastive analyses on how they perceive each other's skills, and leading these sort of discussions, which is really group reflection. And he says it's been a phenomenal change for him because it's so much more rewarding as an educator to be having those discussions about how people are going through that learning process. And it's exactly sort of the stuff that Dave's talking about, is that student engagement and the way that people feel about the program is so much more important than how do you tactically go about doing it. I'll go through some of this very quickly. How much time do I got to have? Another 3-4 minutes? I'll try to do it fast. The main point of this is the world we're in, experiential learning, is complex as it is to itself. There's a lot of stuff that's involved in delivering experiential learning. There's a whole sort of value chain from setting it up through to reporting. There's a lot of aspects in it. Each one of those things you can put technology against. And to that point, there are tons of players sitting in this. Some are experiential learning specific, some are very generic, but are used in experiential programs and in all the different types and formats of experiential learning. So this is a space where every year, this whole diagram, which we keep track of from a competitor analysis, gets more and more crowded. And people move around in it as they try to figure out where the money is, which is a real trick in any form of education, figuring out who's going to pay you for what. There are certain sort of things that the university customers care a lot about. Student success, retention, alumni engagement, particularly in the US, driving enrollments, that's the big thing, retaining enrollments. Slowly, accreditation and compliance are starting to come up as bigger issues, especially in the world of micro-credentials and disaggregated learning. And these map in across that. So what we're seeing is that the technology is chasing the money, and the money is being determined by what higher ed providers, and there's a different one of these from corporate as well, where they see the value to be generated in this space. And so there's a question of which is the tail, which is the dog, and is anything wagging? And then the last little bit is around some interesting risks on this, and this could be a 2-hour talk on its own right, but everybody should be pretty aware of the world of privacy, data security, GDPR, the laws that have just been, that are going through in Australia that are sort of GDPR light. And with education becoming more global, we have transnational projects, so there's a question of who owns the data, the student, the employer, the university, the country that the data happen to pass through. That's not so relevant when it's a simulation or a case study. It gets really important when you start moving into corporate training and you're doing this where the actual submissions are confidential, commercial in confidence work, or you're doing research-based. So we have CRC associations use our platform, and stuff in there is actually, some would have patent rights, some would be pre-publication. That data sovereignty is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. It's just something that's so incompatible with the way the internet's designed, but it's increasingly in this world becoming more of an issue. Student debt in the States, this is massive issue, and so you have a trend to these income share agreements, which in the world of experiential learning gets really, really interesting. When you're doing project-based learning, and those projects can become real projects. And then the question of who should be paying for it. Is it the student paying for it, or should the employer pay for it? Should the university pay for it? And then the last bit is this, one of the really hot areas is coding camps, boot camps, coder programs. Everyone should learn how to code. And we're coming to what I'm calling the coder apocalypse, which is that you've got all of these people who have a very low level of software development capability. They're coming out of boot camps that are great for the first year of the job, but then immediately hit a wall because they don't have the foundational skill to do the deeper level of software development to evolve to the next level, and they also don't have the depth of background in math and even critical thinking and logic to really advance their careers, and then they're stuck. And so you've got all of these very shallow retraining programs that are that everyone's getting excited about, but there is a benefit to getting deep into something. And we can talk about probably more of that in question time. I'll wrap up there, but looking forward to the discussion. I already saw some good questions. Thanks.
And for those line items, it will say that we do have some students. I also have more than here online. So I will ask Wayne to ask at the end.
I'll read them up to you guys.
I apologize that I ignore you almost because if I want to show you presenters and rotate my computer, I can't type.
That's all right.
But I can see it in your notes, so that's okay. Thank you.
All right. Would anyone like to ask a question to either or both?
For David,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that you learned so much from your experience from being a computer scientist and a teacher.
That's right.
And then now that you have open learning, what are the things that you learned from building this product that you think traditional classrooms should also apply?
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
So, like when you're building a technology product, especially in an online space, yeah, and having come from a classroom space, yeah, my mindset has mainly been like, what has been really effective in that classroom experience that I can now apply in the online space? And now you're saying, you know, what have I now learned in the online space that I can then take back if I was doing classroom teaching again? Such a good question. One of the things that I think that has really come out of this online experience is that the face-to-face environment and the online environment, yeah, they don't replace one another. You know, there's elements of online that you can do a completely online course and it can be really valuable, and you can scale things out in interesting ways. But there's also that blended stuff as well. And I've seen since building open learning that there are ways of breaking the ice and building community in online environments that actually propagate back into face-to-face environments as well. So, for example, when I was in the university environment and you have a lecture hall filled with 600 people, you've probably noticed that the first time you go into that lecture theatre as a student, you sit down next to someone, you can introduce yourself to them. You can say, hi, how are you? And you can get to know each other around in your local area there. After about the first week or so, you're not allowed to do that anymore. There's like this unspoken rule that creeps up on the room that means that once you sort of started sitting with the same people, you kind of just sit with them for the rest of the entire course, right? When you have an online environment, you have a little bit more observability of it as a facilitator, and you can actually design into the online environment things a little bit more easily than you can into that physical environment, perhaps at that scale, where you can actually get people to reorganize and bridge gaps and start to talk to each other in that online space. And then if you're running a 600-person lecture theatre style course with an online component on something like open learning, then what you start to discover is that those connections, when you start coming back to the lecture theatre, you've got a much more interesting, vibrant lecture theatre happening, right? Where people are now seeing each other that they recognised online. They're like going, oh, I had that conversation with you online, and they bridge that gap, and now they're friends in the real face-to-face world as well. So when it comes to like small classrooms, yeah, I think that the small classroom effect is something that's quite real. It's much easier to facilitate a small classroom. If you look at a classroom like this as well, everyone seats are like facing forward. You know, you got the screen up here. You got me up the front here. I'm facing out this way, right? It's kind of set up for that sort of the deco. Yeah. So it's set up such that it's kind of. As soon as a teacher walks into this room, there's an expectation from the room, which is sort of guiding how they're meant to use the space. In an online environment, as a learning experience designer, as a learning experience designer, you're not actually involved in the the running of the course necessarily. You're not necessarily the facilitator. You're not even perhaps there as part of the delivery and the engagement of the students. It's almost like you're designing the room of the classroom. So maybe you could also take back that idea of putting on a designer's hat for how would you actually rearrange a classroom for a particular learning experience and change the space around you such that a teacher walking in and the students walking in would sort of automatically put themselves in places that would enhance a particular kind of learning that you want to get out of that session or that classroom experience. So maybe that roundabout way of answering that. There's probably many other types of things like that as well.
Oh, you had a question? No. Okay.
I've got a question for both of you, really. How do you guys approach clients to sort of tailor your product to their needs when they don't actually know what they need? What methods do you find work the best to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think we both probably use very similar ways in that we come at it from our instructional or learner experience designers are very active in the conversation from the get-go. I mean, in our company, it's probably only maybe 2 of our software developers, but all the rest of the company has been in a teaching position at some point, has been in front of a classroom, has worked with students, has done an online program, done something where they're deeply and intimately aware of what the student experience is like, but have also spent quite a bit of time engaging with universities. So they have a very open and collaborative conversation, and it's usually a back and forth. So we'll often share best practice as case studies. So we'll start by saying, here's what we're doing in other places. Here's some examples. What are you looking to do? And we'll find the template or the zone that is the most aligned and say, right, let's show you this. So, oh yeah, I want something, because everyone wants something totally different and unique, but 98% the same of what works elsewhere. So there is that sort of process. I
100% agree, and especially the part where you said that you go and you find out from them what they're looking to get out of it. And I think that's probably the key. If you go in there telling them what they want, then you're probably going to miss everything in terms of what they're actually looking for, what value they're trying to get out of the situation. And it depends who you're talking to as well. If you're talking at decision maker top level, then they're going to be thinking about all the things that you mentioned, like
outcomes. Yeah,
the bang for buck. Where is this going to help my bottom line and all that sort of thing. And but then you go down and you start working with the person who's actually like a subject matter expert and might actually have some passion for education, and you have a completely different conversation with them. And that conversation, I'll give you some examples. I worked with an academic who was very resistant to doing anything. It was like, oh, this is an extra workload for me. I don't really understand the value of this, blah, blah, blah. And then you start to find out what they do find value. What do they want to get out of it? And she was actually quite worried about research output. As all academics are. So, but then it was a conversation about how we're going to do something innovative that we could actually maybe publish a paper on together. And as soon as we went down that path, it was gold. So there's different ways of engaging different types of people depending on what they're trying to get out of the situation.
So something worth mentioning is, particularly when you're selling in higher ed, but I think it goes across the education spectrum,